Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Anushka Kenley and I am Head of Social Sector Work at PBE, formerly known as Pro Bono Economics. We are really excited to be here with our panel today and with all of you joining us in the audience to explore the impacts of arts and cultural programmes on the wellbeing of children and young people in the UK. Our panelists are going to talk much more about this, but just by way of context, I think it's worth going into this with some thoughts about quite how stark the context of this work is. So children and young people in the UK have the lowest wellbeing in Europe. Recent data, I think it's NHS survey data, shows that 1 in 6 children in early childhood in the UK are likely to have a mental health problem, and that rises to 1 in 4 by the age of 19. So understanding the impacts of programmes that help address this mental health crisis is absolutely vital. Our discussion today is going to be rooted in the findings of a recent PBE report. That report focuses on the wellbeing impacts of one particular programme, which is the Factory International Schools programme, and we're going to be hearing from Factory International as one of our brilliant panel speakers today. Before we jump into the panel session, I should just share that today's event is being recorded, so it will be available on the PBE website and YouTube channel after today's session, if you want to share it with anybody. We are going to have time for audience questions after the initial panel speakers, so please do submit them in the chat and we will get to as many of them as possible. The report that we're going to be focused on today is published. It's available on the PBE website, and there's going to be a link for you to access that report coming through in the chat. And finally, we would absolutely love you to post about today's event on social media. So please do tag us on LinkedIn or Blue Sky, or use the hashtag PBE events anywhere else. So we are very lucky today, as I said, to be joined by a fantastic lineup of speakers. First of all, we have the architect of the Factory International Schools programme, Amber Calland, who is Creative Learning Manager at Factory International. Welcome, Amber. We're also really thrilled to have Dan Hughes, who is a teacher at Melland High School and whose pupils participated in the programme. So we'll be able to hear from Dan about what it was like to be part of the programme itself. From the University of Manchester's Be Well programme, we have Professor Neil Humphreys, Professor of Psychology of Education, and we're thrilled to have Neil. We've worked with him on many projects over the years, and he's always a brilliant contributor. And finally, from PB, we are joined by my colleague, Maliha Rahanaz, who is the lead economic analyst and the author of today's report. So thank you all for joining. We've got lots to cover, so let's jump into it. And I'd like to go to Amber first. So Amber, please tell us a bit more about the Factory International Schools programme. What is it that motivated you to make it happen? How did you develop it? What sort of issues was it that you wanted to address for children and young people in Manchester through the programme?
Thanks very much. I'm really excited to be talking to everybody about Factory International Schools today. So the programme was developed in response to our belief that all young people, no matter their background, deserve access to high quality and consistent arts activity. Because we know that arts can support young people to develop confidence, to develop a sense of self, and really to help them understand the world around them. But as we know, schools are having increasing pressures to deliver core curriculum, which means in tangent that the arts curriculum is being shrunk, and a lot of young people aren't having that same level of creativity that they might once have had 10, 20 years ago. And not all young people are able to access the arts outside of schools. So often for a lot of young people, especially in schools across Manchester, there is not as much engagement with arts because they're not able to access it when they're at home and in their free time. So we wanted to create a programme that addressed this gap. And our ambition was to work with school communities, young people, senior leaders on a sustained year-round basis. And through this programme, we wanted to really uncover how deep longitudinal programmes of work that work with young people on a weekly basis can support their well-being and their personal growth, and ultimately their chance to thrive later in life. So we spent around a year developing the programme before launching it in 2023. We consulted with young people, with youth workers, with artists, with educators, and all of these insights helped us to form the structure and the concept for what became Factory International Schools. So the way the programme worked is we partnered with 5 schools in year 1, and they were 5 schools across Greater Manchester, 4 of which were mainstream schools, and 1 of them was a special educational needs secondary school. And in each of those schools, we worked with up to 40 young people, and they were split into 2 groups of 20, so around 20 in a class. And we would work with each individual young person for 2 hours each school week. So that's 2 hours of creative learning that we would be delivering with these young people. And this was facilitated by 2 facilitators in each of the schools, which were artists in their own right. They had their own creative practice, but incredible experience facilitating with young people in youth centres in schools and in all kinds of ways. So in the group itself of our cohort, 75% of the cohort was eligible for free school meals and pupil premium, which is a really high percentage. Around 25% of the group were deemed at risk, which was at risk of exclusion due to their attendance or their behaviour. Around 20%, 25% of the group were passive learners, and the rest were those that might have shown some interest in creative engagement, or those that were maybe starting to explore that at a higher level. So we found it essential that we wanted to design a curriculum that was really accessible to those that may have never really done in-depth kind of arts activities before. So the curriculum was split into around 7 small projects across the course of the academic year, which included photography, digital art, performance, visual art, and some of which were individual projects and some of which were collaborative projects, getting young people to work together towards a design brief or a brief that was set by artists on the programme, and sometimes international artists that were connected to as Factory International. So each of the projects was designed to support emotional and social and emotional outcomes. It wasn't just the creative medium that was the driving force. We really designed each of the individual programs to help young people explore their identity and feel what their position is in this world, and have moments of reflection, discourse, and discussions to help build a bigger picture and express how they feel about the state of the world and who they are within this world. And there were 3 core themes which were attached to all of our projects, which were identity, climate, and art for change. And we were using a lot of references of the professional work that was happening at Aviva Studios, which is where our Factory International, where our home is. A huge part of the programme was ensuring that young people had access to cultural experiences beyond the classroom. So each participant would go to a minimum of 3 trips at Aviva Studios, and they were to go and see the professional performances and artworks that were happening at our building. And these were designed not only to broaden their cultural capital, but to spark curiosity into the creative careers that might be available to them in the industry. And they got to meet with artists, technical teams, creative practitioners. And the idea was that they would be able to think about their own skills and interests that they were uncovering in our sessions, and perhaps translate them into future opportunities. The programme itself culminated in a huge takeover event at Aviva Studios right at the end of the academic year. And this meant that the young people's work was presented in the same spaces that we are platforming national and international artists. So they got to really see themselves on that scale, which was just a wonderful thing to see. And the final celebration itself was actually designed by young people on the programme. We developed a collective of young people. It was around 20 from across all of the 5 partner schools. And we would meet outside of the programme. And together we would use creative discussion and, again, discourse to decide what we wanted that event to look like. And their brief was to create an event for young people by young people that celebrated them. So through this process, they also developed project management, communication, leadership skills, and really got to understand what it means to create and present your work in a professional context. But I guess to summarize, the programme was created to address the inequality in access to the arts and offer a stable and meaningful creative intervention within a school environment, and really develop those long-term relationships with an arts organisation and with artists. and for us to be able to look at what that long-term impact on young people's well-being and confidence and sense of possibility could look like through a real longitudinal programme.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Amber. And one question that popped into my mind, but this could be the right moment to pass over to Dan, was just for those students who did participate, how much of this was a new experience to them? How much was it opening up opportunities that they wouldn't have had before? I think this might be the right moment to bring Dan into the conversation. So Dan, thank you very much for finding some space in your no doubt incredibly busy schedule in between teaching and marking. It's really wonderful to have you here to share your experience of what the Factory International Schools programme was actually like for a school participating. Could you tell us a bit more about your students and how they experienced the programme? You know, were these all really new experiences for them? What did you guys do? And did you notice any changes in students who took part in the programme?
Yeah, so I teach at a special school in Manchester. And we have lots of diverse special educational needs, and it's a range of 11 to 19-year-olds. So we were part of the pilot scheme from Factory International. We applied as soon as we saw it. We knew it was for us. This school is really passionate about creativity, and we was looking for something new along the lines of other projects that we had done in the past. And this seemed like the right one. So when we applied and we were accepted to be part of the pilot scheme, I was very, very excited. Because we have such a range of needs at our school, we did split our students where we had a higher need group and a lower need group as well. So you can imagine there's a lot of our students they're not able to go to performances in the same way as, say, mainstream students would. It has to be very sort of organized and very structured, and there's a lot of work that has to go in to be able to do that. By coming into with Factory, they were absolutely amazing and absolutely got what our school was about. The experiences that they created for our students in school, for them to meet artists and meet people that were being creative and getting paid to be creative, is just a massive experience for them, and realizing, oh, I can get paid to be creative as well. It just opened up their eyes. But the actual projects that they were involved in were just brilliant. Using digital art, they were making these huge masks. They were writing poetry, and it was all unlocking creativity in students with a range of needs that they had never accessed before. But it was also good for us as teachers to work with them to sort of guide us along of how we can bring it into our teaching as well, and share with other teachers too. But I think what was huge for us is when they were organising trips, which Amber talked about earlier. They were just so supportive of the needs of our students and giving them these sort of cultural experiences that they would never get before. Now, because our school had much smaller groups, the ticket allocation was still the same. So it meant that our students' parents could come along too, which again was a huge opening for our parents. So we're in quite a deprived area where they wouldn't usually get a chance to go to these kind of performances. But all the performances and experiences were just so different. Some of them were like your traditional performance on a stage and in seating. Some was like immersive performance. It's sort of like you walk in a room and it's got lots of lights and lots of videos, and it was just amazing for a lot of our students as well. So Aviva almost come as a second home to us. But in terms of the students themselves, we saw an improvement in creativity. We saw an improvement in attendance, because the way we chose our students as well, it was around students that were interested in creativity, but it was also students that maybe becoming disengaged with school. So attendance was better for a lot of them in terms of their confidence as well, and then also getting involved in other creative projects. So we've got students that started on the the trial period at first that have continued to go into creativity. We've got one now that's performing on stages that she wouldn't have done that before because of the anxieties she had and some of the sort of behaviours that come with her. And now she's performing on stages, singing, going to cosplay and all sorts. It's just opened so many opportunities for them. And you can tell from the families as well how much they appreciated that they were on this project. But then across the school, as soon as they could see the experiences that we was having, it meant a lot of the students wanted to get involved as well. So when it opened up for the next year, we did change the students around, so more was involved. We kept some on that we thought it was good for them to stay. But then as it come to last year, we didn't have the finances to be able to continue, which was really unfortunate. However, what Factory had given us was a lot of experience, a lot of ways of how we could recreate that creative project. So we still do run our own project, similar to what Factory have set up for us. It is a lot more work because we're having to put the planning in, we're having to seek out performances for them to go to. However, it's made us sort of be more proactive in making sure that we can create these opportunities for our students. So it was an amazing experience. Also the contacts as well that Factory had set up for us, and we definitely will keep on visiting Aviva Studios. We were very lucky to go to the first opening performance, which was a Matrix performance with Danny Boyle directed, and it was absolutely stunning and blew all our minds, and that just hooked us in straight away. But absolutely brilliant for our students in every kind of way.
Thank you so much. And that's I think there's no greater praise for any charity program than continued engagement and people wanting to continue to participate. So I think that's a really good demonstration of the impact that has had for you as a school. Obviously now the focus of PBE's report has been the sort of the technical data element of that impact. So having had that picture painted so nicely for us by Dan, I'm going to bring in Neil. So Neil, as I say, is a professor at Manchester University, and he runs the Be Well programme. Maybe, Neil, you could start by just telling us a little bit more about that Be Well programme and what it is that it's taught you about the state of children and young people's mental health and wellbeing in the UK.
Thanks, Anushka. Good afternoon, everyone. So before I forget, I need to acknowledge Stephanie Ray and Chi Cheng, who are part of our Be Well team here at the university, because all of the data and all of the analysis and things that's fed into what PBE have done has come from Steph and Chi-Chi's hard work. So before I forget, I get to talk about all this, but there's a very hard-working team that makes everything happen. With that said, so Be Well is a young people's wellbeing programme that we've been running now at the university since 2021. Our kind of mission is to make young people's wellbeing everybody's business. We want to see young people's wellbeing given parity of esteem with their academic attainment. We think it's just as important as young people's exam results. Their kind of mental health and wellbeing is equally important, and that's kind of our core aim. The backbone of the programme is we do an annual co-created survey. So we worked with a lot of young people and continue to work with a lot of young people to shape the project and determine the kinds of questions that we ask. But we do an annual survey with young people across Greater Manchester, but also on the south coast of England as well. And we ask them about different aspects of their wellbeing and the things that drive their wellbeing. We do that as inclusively as we possibly can. So we have different versions of the survey. So Melland is a good example of the kind of school that typically our kinds of studies typically don't reach because our surveys don't meet the needs of their students. And so we have for special schools and APs and PRUs and other non-mainstream education settings, we have different versions of the survey so that all young people can access and have their voice heard. So this annual survey, and we feed the data back then to schools. One of the primary ways in which we put the data to work is feeding the data back to schools through dashboards and reports and events and communities of practice. The idea being that we're giving them an evidence base once a year that can then help them better understand the needs and strengths of their pupil cohorts, and they can plan their provision accordingly. And they can also look at kind of what things are working and what things are not, what kinds of issues there are in their school, how they compare to other schools that are like them, those kinds of things. We also publish the data publicly as well by neighbourhoods. So if you go on the BEWELL website, there's a really nice heat map of Greater Manchester, and you can look at all the kind of different things that we measure and how they vary across different neighbourhoods in Greater Manchester. And that's been really useful for some of our voluntary and community sector organisations. To come to the point around what our data is telling us about the mental health and wellbeing of young people. So we've worked with, we've collected data from about 135,000 young people to date. So that's, to put that in context, you could fill the Etihad Stadium and Old Trafford with the number of young people that have done our survey at least once. But by Christmas, by December, when our current survey period ends, that'll probably be closer to 190,000. So nearly 200,000 young people that will have done our surveys at least once. What those data are telling us is, as you started, Anushka, in the introduction, there's a crisis around young people's wellbeing. There are far too many young people whose mental health and wellbeing is a cause for concern. But what it also tells us is there's significant inequalities. So there are certain groups of young people who are much more likely to be experiencing mental ill health than their peers. But also what the data is telling us, speaking to the topic of this webinar, is that there's also inequality in young people's access to arts and creative activities. So one of the things that we ask young people about in the survey, alongside the stuff around their well-being, is how frequently they engage in lots of different kinds of arts and creative activities. And when we've analysed that data, again, we see inequalities. So having something like factory schools that can help to level the playing field a little bit in terms of young people's access is a really good thing.
Thank you, Neil. And just another shout out, if anybody's interested, do go and have a look at the Be Well programme. It is an amazing piece of work, really fascinating data, and Neil and his team doing incredible stuff. So do have a look at that, anybody's interested. And from PB's perspective, without that data, we could not do the work that we do, which looks at the impact, the marginal impact that's created by specific programs that go in and work with specific groups of young people, because it wouldn't give us that comparison group that helps us understand how a particular program adds value. So thanks again to Neil for all his work there. And I'm going to pass finally over now to my colleague Maliha. Maliha was the lead economist on our report, did the analysis for PBE. I think you've got some slides, Maliha. It'd be brilliant to hear about your findings and really help our audience understand how is it possible to assess the wellbeing value of interventions like this one.
Thanks, Anushka, and a very good afternoon to everyone joining today. I'm going to just share my slides. I think they're on for everyone to see. So we've heard quite a bit about the state of children and young people's mental health, with our headline statistics that this tends to increase when children are moving from early childhood to secondary school. And we can acknowledge that this is the moment when young people are facing identity, pressure, and belonging, and this is where all of these are colliding. And too many young people tend to lose confidence, creativity, and connection if we're not able to help them at that point. And Neil has also touched on the point of the benefits of engaging with arts and culture. There is an excellent report that was published by the Culture and Alliance Learning Center back in 2017, where they found that children and young people that engage with arts and culture, they can increase their cognitive abilities by 17%. So this is cognitive abilities, meaning their critical thinking, their approach to problem solving, and more. This impact of engaging with arts and culture is also felt especially by those from low-income families. So they are also children from these families are also more likely to get a degree, 3 times more likely to get a degree. And young offenders who take part in arts activities are also 18% less likely to reoffend. These statistics are descriptive. They're taken from various other places of references. But apart from that, more importantly, they're all leading us to one answer, or one of the answers that could be important right now, is that they're a powerful force for building resilience and improving mental health of children and young people. And we find this, for example, in one of our other previous work with Artist Foundation, that provide also arts and cultural engagement, but with children in primary school. And we found there as well that there were significant improvements to children's mental health as measured through the strength of questionnaire. But having said that, there still exists a gap, which is we need more evidence on the economic impact of these programs. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the Factory International Schools program. Amber has given us, a very thorough explanation. I'm just going to touch on the basis of what we had and we're looking at in the report. So the Factory Schools program offers in-school arts and culture activities. It's split into 6 half-term throughout the school year, so it's very structured, very organized. The students know what they're going to be part of, and of course, as Amber mentioned, there's a year-end showcasing of activities and performance. Each of these half-term activities, they're also measurable. So it's not like children just take part in this and then they move on to the other one. They're also assessed and they're also measured in each of those activities that they take part in. So there's like a continuous engagement with these sort of activities. So the Factory Schools program was designed to enhance the well-being and confidence of young people through this sustained engagement with arts and culture. It was a pilot year that ran between 2023 and 2024. During this year, 181 students were supported across 5 schools in the Greater Manchester area. And from the cost figures that we have, this program costs about £1,314 per participant. Next slide, please. So let's look at the results at a glance because they're super interesting, super significant. So the Factories International School program participants, they reported an improvement of about 0.6 points on the life satisfaction scale. If we were to assume that these impacts last 12 months, then this intervention/program delivers £7.44 in well-being benefits for every pound spent. Very significant figures. And as we mentioned in the report, this is equivalent to an individual moving from unemployment to employment. Putting things into a broader perspective, this also translates to a well-being value of about £10,000 per participant. As we do in our analysis, we look at various different scenarios. And even when we consider those scenarios that were very cautious or non-cautious, we still find that these benefits continue to outweigh the costs. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm going to take us through a journey of how we arrived at these results. But before we do that, let's talk a bit about what do we mean by the life satisfaction scale and how does that relate to measuring well-being in the UK. So about a decade ago, the ONS developed a standard measure of personal well-being, and it sort of has emerged as the primary measure used in a lot of the research, as it tends to be relatively stable. So it's not looking at like subtle changes in mood, but it's like activities and engagement that impact an individual's life and what shapes our lives. For example, like getting into employment or feeling lonely or even recovering from mental ill health. So I can give us an example. If someone gets a job, then their score is going to go up. If they feel lonely or they experience poor mental health, then this tends to drop. If they recover or even build other social connections, it improves again. So essentially, this question asks people to rate how satisfied they are with their life nowadays. So they could be at 3, and then we could ask them this question again. And if they are at 4, that means something has happened to them that has improved their satisfaction with life. So what does this increase in the life satisfaction outcome that we found in the Factory Schools program participants tell us? So according to the HMT guidance, a 1-point improvement. So suppose if it was starting at 3 and we moved at 4, that's a 1-point improvement in this life satisfaction measure. And if it's sustained for a year, it's considered a well-being. For economic evaluation purposes, the value of 1 well-being by improvement in well-being, it ranges between £12,584 to £20,134 in 2025 prices. There is a central value, which we have included in our analysis, which is around £16,359. I should clarify that the value of a one well-being improvement does not represent money in your pocket or a direct financial gain, but it measures how much the average person in the UK is prepared to pay for that improvement on that life satisfaction scale. Naturally, the next question would be, why do we like it? So we like it for a number of reasons. The first is that it's an outcome that most charities like because it measures, firstly, it's simple to use and ask. So it's just a one question versus asking 60-page question to someone about their life. Second of all, it reflects what matters most to charities. So if they're part of an intervention or a program or delivering it, which is accounting for improvement in well-being, then they're able to capture that. And finally, it can be asked to anyone above the age of 10 and can also be administered in school and has been tried and tested. Next slide, please. So to arrive at our results, we've taken a four-step approach. So the first approach is we're looking at comparing the well-being scores between the factory schools participants and the similar young people in the BeWell data set. And we can expand a bit more on that. This is where matching techniques were used to understand what is the impact or the difference in impact that we find between these two groups. We need the control group, or we have taken the control group because it helps us to understand whether the change is due to the program. Can we attribute the impact that we find to the program? And it also helps us to isolate the program's added impact. In the second step, we assign an economic value to the improvement in the well-being. So if you recall the last slide where we're looking at one well-being gain, we can assign that to the improvement that we find. And then we can compare the well-being cost to the benefit. So we have the costs from the charity and we can take it as a per participant cost and we can compare that to the value to the participant as well. And finally, we do a cost-benefit ratio analysis, and we find how much benefit does a participant receive for £1 in cost. So headline figures, our findings find that engagement with the factory schools program increases young people's life satisfaction score by about 0.6 points on the scale of 0.10 of the life satisfaction measure. This translates to about £10,000 in average well-being improvement. And if you multiply this with 181 students, you'd find that this is giving us a total well-being benefit of £1.7 million. Sorry, next slide, please. And you can find that once we have the costs and we have the benefits, we can arrive at our benefit cost ratio, which tells us that for every £1 spent, the factory schools program delivers about 7.44 in well-being benefit. So that's the results in an overall, and happy to take more questions about our approach and how we arrived at this.
Maliha, thank you. That was really clear and comprehensive. And I'll just encourage anybody who's got more techie questions for Maliha about the process that she went through, please do submit them in the chat. We're going to move to audience Q&A first in a moment. I actually just wanted to start by maybe geeking out a little bit. I wondered if Neil might join us again and talk a little bit about the matching techniques that you used to find a similar group of young people so that Maliha had a control group that she could compare the results of the Factory International program to a similar group of young people who didn't participate in the program.
Yeah, thanks, Anushka. With BeWell, we have a massive data resource. So as I said, we've got tens and tens of thousands of young people. And one of the advantages we have is we've got, at any one point in time, we've got a cohort of young people that we're tracking. So that gives us an immediate opportunity where you've got the young people who did the factory program and they took measures before and after participation. Same measures we use in BeWell. And then what we do is we want to find in our massive data set We want to find a comparable group of young people who can serve that purpose as the control group. And what we do there is we use something called propensity score matching. So the kind of I suppose the lay explanation for this is the way that this matching works is we look at the group that have had the intervention and we look at what is it about them that's led to them getting the intervention. And that can be partly through some of the things that Amber was talking about, for example, the different types of young people that were recruited to the program, but also it's about the data that we hold on the young people. So things like gender and free school meal eligibility and so on. So we can pull together a really comprehensive picture of the different factors that influence young people's participation in the Factory Schools program. And then we can use that to generate what we call propensity scores in our big BWell data set. And basically, the closer to 1 you are, the more likely you would be to be a good candidate for the intervention if it were offered. So what we do is we apply all of that analytics, and that enables us to pull out of the tens of thousands of young people a very, very similar comparison group. The key difference being the kids in the BWell data set haven't participated in Factory Schools, but in other respects, they're very similar to the Factory Schools cohort of young people. So we do that. The other thing that I would say that we do that's worth members of the audience knowing is if anyone's familiar with propensity score matching, they'll know that there's lots of different ways to do it. And so what we always do is we will have our main matching approach, but then we do sensitivity analysis. So we say, okay, well, actually, if we match the data in this other way that somebody else has kind of recommended, and then we reanalyze their findings, does it make any difference? And that's really helpful because it tells us how robust basically our findings are. And one of the key things in relation to that finding in terms of life satisfaction gain is that we're able to replicate that across 3, if not 4, of the different matching techniques that we've used. So we have this technique that enables us to kind of pull out very similar young people from our much bigger data set and match them across, and then we can compare the life satisfaction scores. And then the final thing I'll say before I forget is even though we're focusing on life satisfaction for the economic analysis that Maliha outlined, we also found using the same approach that it improved young people's ability to cope with stress. So that's not featured in the economic analysis per se, but it's another important finding just in terms of the kind of positive impact of the program.
Thanks, Neil. And Maliha, just sort of building on that, I mean, these findings are kind of mega. You know, £1 spent on this program generates more than £7 of value. You know, that seems like a real no-brainer for an investment. How robust are these results? How confident are you that they're accurate?
Thanks, Anushka. I think that's a question we should be asking. And I think to start off, let me help by clarifying what we mean by robust. So in simple terms, robust means that our results that we find remain strong and reliable, even when we stress test them or we do sensitivity checks to understand them in different ways. So I've mentioned that the FISP participants experienced a 0.6 point improvement in their life satisfaction score. And if this was sustained, it represents significant value for money. But what we also want to understand is how that value for money changes when we do sensitivity tests around those findings. So for example, as Neil touched on them, by looking at different matching techniques, the point estimates we find for those matching techniques, we have looked at different levels of persistence over time. So also looking at non-linear patterns, and I'll talk a bit more about that. And we've also used the low and high estimates of the well-being value that I showed in the previous slide. And, you know, for all the scenarios that we considered, the benefits for every £1 still fall in the range of between £1.68 and about £9.16. So it's continually delivering value for money. So let me just give our viewers, a bit of about the scenarios that we considered. So one of the cautious ones that we looked at was where we don't assume that the well-being effects appear all at once. Instead, we assume that there is a build-up of slowly of these impacts and steadily over 10 months, which is the timeline of the program, and then they fade out gradually over the following 10 months as well. And, in the report, there's a lot more explanation of that, or more justification of that. And even in this scenario, we find that when we do the cost-benefit ratio, each £1 in cost results in about £6 of benefits. So I'd really encourage our viewers to look at those reports and see how we've captured those various scenarios to determine how robust these results are.
Great, thank you, Maliha. So essentially, whatever happens, we're always seeing positive value being generated by this program, no matter what assumptions we make in our modelling. That's really helpful to know. I wonder if I might bring Amber back in, because Amber, you might not be an economist, but when you looked at these results, what was your response? Did you think, yeah, of course, I'm not surprised with generating loads of value, or were the numbers a shock for you?
I mean, the numbers are significant. We always hope when we're designing a program of this nature that it would have that impact. And the reason that we're doing it is because we believe in it. But to see those numbers was incredibly exciting. And, it just shows that early intervention in this way and investment in creativity with young people, it could have long-term impacts on mental health services and creating a more sustainable place for young people to live in the future. And yeah, it was incredibly exciting, and if a little bit surprising because of how sheer that number was. And yeah.
I mean, I think these findings, as Maliha has referred to, that they contribute to a really growing body of evidence that demonstrates quite how much high quality arts and cultural experiences can have a really powerful positive impact on young people. And it's an area, as we contribute more evaluations like this to the evidence base, we can continue to make the case for more investment in programs like this. I wonder if I could bring Dan back into us and just ask Dan, I mean, you talked very persuasively about the impact that the program had on your students. On the other side of this, what are the barriers for schools being able to access arts and culture and maybe for your pupils or for your school overall? What are the things that make it hard to access these sorts of activities, which obviously have a massive impact on student well-being?
Yeah, I have worked at mainstream as well as special schools, and so I've had a varied experience working in schools, and my philosophy has always been creativity is the key to happiness within school communities, and it brings communities together. However, schools do operate on very tight budgets as well. So, and with that, when you've got programs like this, there's fundings for materials, for transportation, if you're getting specifics, facilitators in. It's schools have pressures to meet academic targets, so a lot of the time there'll be a lot more focus on your English and your maths and your science, and there's big drives on that, and pupils feel that pressure as well when the teachers are pressured to do that, which I've always been, if you've got that creativity balance as well, that pressure is not going to be on the students too, because they've still got an outlet of their creativity. So yeah, it's you might have a lack of staff with confidence or training around that as well. So with all that in place, the schools just struggle, and they're struggling all the time, and the financial side of it is bigger than ever. I remember a time when I very first started at school where there was money all over to do any of these kind of projects, and schools just don't have that money anymore. So it is a really, really tight.
And Amber, I'm going to just come back to you. A reminder to the audience, please, we have a few minutes left if you want to submit any questions in the chat. Some of you did submit questions when you registered, so to just jump onto a couple of those. Building on what Dan has just said to us, one of the audience questions that was submitted in advance was, more evidence about the economic benefits of these sorts of programs is really welcome, but how do we escape that funding loop where you get pilot funding, but it's very hard to get funding to scale up a program? And how important is this sort of evidence in breaking that loop and allowing programs to properly scale?
Thank you for this question. I agree,
Amber, if you've got any.
Can you hear me? Great. So I think that funders and policymakers need consistent and comparable data collected over multiple years, because I think it makes it easier for government to see cumulative impact and justify preventative investment. And something I've been thinking about is the way that schools and arts organisations can become more partnered with local authorities. I think if multi-year school partnerships and place-based pilots and regional cultural compacts can create sustained demand, then government budgets have to respond in this way, and it stops arts organisations being parachuted in, and these kind of programs being parachuted in, and it becomes something that is part of much more long-term planning. And ultimately, we need a shift in narrative from always proving the value of arts and culture to actually asserting it and it becoming a part of an essential cost, like a cost-saving method for public services. So instead of it being that constant drive to always be talking about how much arts and culture can value individuals and organisations and schools and young people, it being part of a framework. And I think that embedding creative education and creative health into policy language could be a crucial step in doing this.
Thanks, Amber. And one audience question is just, how was this particular programme funded? And then I might move over and just ask Dan, because you said you were able to continue delivering some of this work even when Factory left. How have you been able to fund that work?
So when projects like this come available, so because we was part of the pilot scheme and it went so well, we then had to bid for some money within school and the trust. So school get a specific amount of money to be able to run their whole year. So we had to bid to say this is the money that we wanted to do this project. And because of the success from the year before, we was able to get that. But then obviously with projects like this, their outgoings change throughout that year as well. But with schools, when you get given a certain amount of money, that's the money you have allocated then the next year. So if it's not within that allocation, it's difficult then to bid again. But because we had the money from the year before, we was still able to use that to continue our project of sorts that's similar link to how Factory have helped us set up and continue doing a great work.
Thanks. And Amber, is the schools programme, is that all philanthropic funding?
So it's a range. It includes philanthropic funding, including some support from the Backstage Trust. It's partly our Arts Council funding, our Manchester City Council funding, and that represents year one. So year one, it was free for schools to participate in, as it was a pilot, and we were understanding how to deliver this program with schools. And then when we went into year two, which was 2024 to 2025, there was a cost attached to the program, and that was £9,000 per school, which was still highly subsidised by Factory International. And we actually saw that 3 schools that participated on the pilot returned to the program, despite there being that cost attached, which was a real success in our eyes. The schools obviously saw the benefit to their young people.
And Amber, I mean, now if you're making the case for investment in your programme, is this sort of impact data, Neil's work and Maliha's work, does that make it easier to make the case, or is it more the stories, the case studies, Dan speaking so persuasively about the impact that it's had on his students?
I think, we need that narrative, and we need to hear about those individuals that have benefited and those case studies. And we've got plenty of those, but actually I do think ultimately it comes down to numbers a lot of the time. And having this data, I think, will be a real benefit to us and hopefully to other organisations who can use this as a case study to share, to go for their kind of funding bids, or whether it's a brand partnership or philanthropic. And we hope that this doesn't stay just within our ecosystem, but is is used by others to benefit them and ultimately young people.
Brilliant, thank you. I have one more question that was submitted by an audience member at registration, and this might be a bit for Neil, it might be for Dan, you might come at it from different angles. They asked, given the universality of creative activity that you see in early years education, what do you think the cost is, whether that's in terms of well-being or in terms of economic value, that might be attributed to not carrying on that creative activity from early years into later stage education? Either of you have any thoughts on that, or anybody feel free to share reflections? Maybe it's very difficult to pin down. Neil?
I think, thanks, Anushka. I think it is difficult to pin down, but as a general observation, I think, it's clear what we do see as kids kind of progress through from early years into primary and into secondary and on, a narrowing in terms of the amount of time that they're able to spend on kind of creative activities. The data from this research, but also lots of other data as well in the sector. So there's a whole evidence base now that's building that just shows just how valuable for young people's lives this kind of activity can be. So, in the way that things narrow as kids progress through school, we're missing a trick, really. I mean, if we return to the starting point of the kind of mental health crisis that we've got, that's been kind of bubbling away for young people and was accelerated by the pandemic, and it's still there, and we compare very poorly to other countries in Europe in terms of our young people's well-being. And yet we've got really good evidence from this study and from other studies that show just how powerful this kind of, it's a really quick win in my eyes, that, if we just did a little bit more of this, if we found the space and the funding and the resource to enrich young people's lives with this kind of activity, I'm not saying that would disappear this mental health crisis overnight, but it would certainly help to kind of chip away at the numbers of young people who are experiencing low levels of well-being. So I think there's definitely something there around, again, coming back to Amber's point about how we get leverage here. We need to advocate for this kind of work. We need to lobby, those who are the decision makers, who hold the purse strings, to say, look, if you're serious about young people's mental health, there's really straightforward ways in which we can improve it, and we can, and it's a way for young people who quite often don't experience success in traditional academic ways can really experience success at school. And I think that's really important for some of the young people as well, that for some of them, it will be, their most enjoyed part of school. Some of our qualitative data that we've not spoken about today, you've got young people saying this is what makes me come in on a Thursday, and that's really difficult to place a monetary value on. It's just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think as well in primary school, very quickly they've got the SATs to be thinking about and pushing along that area, and then they come into high school, and then straight away the focus is then on the GCSEs. You've also got like a cultural sort of thought process of you need all these academic subjects to be successful in life, but you do need that creativity as well. For me, what I try to do is I try and create experiences for students, how it makes them feel, because they're not going to remember that one English lesson or that one maths lesson, but they'll remember a big project that they've done and how it made them feel. It might not be specific hour that they had in there, but when they look back in 10, 15 years time, they'll know how that project made them feel. And most of the time, it's how happy and how confident and just how amazing it made them feel being on that project.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's why we at PBE and at Be Well, we really love that life satisfaction question, because it captures all of that subjective personal experience in a way that a question about specific activities might not capture that feeling. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I have one final wrap-up question. I'm going to take it to each of you. Oh, we do have one audience question. Keen to understand if different art forms, format and length of interventions have been explored and identified to have different effects. I wonder if Neil or Maliha might want to quickly take that before we go to our last question. So do we have any sense of whether... Yeah, sorry, Jim.
Stephanie, who I mentioned at the outset, who's one of the kind of key people that's been leading on this work from our end, has actually been doing a review of the literature. So she's doing a PhD, including work on the factory evaluation, and her literature review actually starts to look at that. So all I was going to say was some really interesting findings around the idea of having a range of activities for young people, which is exactly what the Factory Schools program does, exposing young people to different experiences over the course of the school year seems to be really powerful. But then there are, some examples of kind of, very focused stuff around music and things like that. So I think the key thing that we're seeing, and hopefully Steph's review will be published soon in the next year or so, is that, there's no one silver bullet way of doing this, but, doing something around arts and creativity and doing it consistently can kind of, can really open up doors for some young people.
Thanks, Neil. And there'll be other places you can look at this. So maybe the Centre for Youth Impact or other organisations that focus on understanding what works in interventions supporting young people would open some of that up to you as well. So very last question, a brief response from all of you would be great. If there's anybody in the audience watching who's thinking about maybe creating an arts and culture programme for young people, maybe a school thinking about participating in one, maybe a funder or a commissioner thinking about making one happen, what would your one tip or your one message to that organisation or that person be? I'm going to go in alphabetical order, to be fair, so I'll start with Amber.
So yeah, I guess consultation for me would be that first place to start. I know what I would like to deliver, but what do young people want to see in their classroom is something very different. So ultimately, who's your audience? And here it's young people as well as educators. How can we support their school environment? How can we link to their wider agenda outside of just arts and creativity, whether it's cultural capital or something different like Oracy? How can you really speak with the people that you're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis to make this happen? And yeah, really try to understand their needs is the first place I'd start.
Brilliant, fantastic tip, Amber. Dan.
Yeah, I'm going to just piggyback on what Amber said, to be honest. It's about knowing who your project is for. So whenever we're setting up any kind of project in our school, it's all based around the individuals that are going to be involved and how it develops them as a person, whether it's communication skills, independent skills. So yeah, just have a very clear path of what it is and who it is that you're doing the project for.
Fantastic, thank you. Maliha.
Thanks, Anushka. I'm going to answer this from an evaluation perspective. So as we gather more and more evidence around standardized measures, so asking the life satisfaction questions, we can benchmark them across other organizations as well. And that adds to the evidence base, and that in return, helps us build our case for more funding in that area or for more policy impact in that area, and helping to inform more decisions to understand what works.
Brilliant, thank you. And Neil.
Everything that Maliha and Dan and Amber said, I would 100% endorse. And I would also add in, have a really clear kind of theory of how, so if you're developing a new program, really thinking through the steps of, well, how is this going to work? What are the outcomes I want to achieve, and how are we going to get there? And what are these different activities going to do to get us towards that outcome? So kind of, really thinking through how the intervention is intended to work is a really kind of crucial step that will also help them with kind of consultation and evaluation, because you can talk to young people about, well, when you're doing these kinds of activities, how does it make you feel? And similarly, you can think about how you might evidence your theory of change when you do the evaluation work.
Brilliant, thank you. It's a really consistent message from everyone. Clear plan, clear dialogue, clear consultancy, understand what you're doing, who you're working with, and ask that life satisfaction question to get some good data. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much, everybody who's watched today and sat through the end of Thursday as it's got darker and colder and more miserable outside. And now I've got to go and pick up my children in the freezing weather. Amber, Dan, Neil, Maliha, thank you for joining us. Just to say, the report we've been discussing, as I said, is available on the PB website. It's free to download. Have a quick look at it. If you want to come to more events like this, we have webinars regularly. They're free. They're always fascinating. We have brilliant panels like we've had today. So make sure you're signed up to PB's newsletter, and there'll be a link to that in the chat as well. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.